everyone, and welcome back to FinCrime Insiders. This is episode 3. I'm your host, Skylar Palmer, and I'm here with my partner, Lauren Schaefer, and our special guest this afternoon, Gianna Johnson. Today, we're going to be talking about all things financial crimes compliance. We'll be asking Gianna 5 questions about herself and her experiences in the industry, and we're excited to hear her insights. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone watching or listening that the views and opinions expressed on FinCrime Insiders are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their past, current, or future employers. Any content provided by our webcast hosts or participants are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. And now, without further ado, let's get this started.
Good afternoon. Welcome today to the FinCrime Insiders. We have the privilege of introducing Gianna Johnson, who is an AML investigator at a major retail bank. She's a team member, team that's comprised of approximately 12 individuals, which includes a dedicated manager who oversees the administrative tasks, 3 to 4 senior investigators, and 8 AML investigators like herself. Could you give us a brief description of what your daily responsibilities look like, Gianna?
Yeah. Hey, so basically my daily responsibilities just include getting a workload of cases and reviewing those cases and, dispositioning them, deciding whether I want to file a SAR or file it as a non-reportable and keep it as a no SAR. So those are kind of my scope of responsibilities as of this moment.
Awesome.
Great.
So when you say you're dispositioning the cases, no SAR or SAR, these are escalated and assigned to you from a different team?
No. So basically, there's a big pool of cases for basically the entire financial institution. And then it's just the senior investigators pull from that pile and then assign it to their investigators, is what I understand what happens. From it's a little bit different from my previous experience from my previous employer, because with this line of work, or with this role, we don't really have an alert triage unit. All the initial screening at the alert level is done like by a system generated system, or if it's like a manual, call it, it's when it's like basically a manual referral. So basically when we get something, it's automatically at the case level, and then we decide from the case level whether we want to file it as a SAR or keep it at the case level and file a no SAR for it.
Okay, that's interesting. So you're saying that the system generated alerts, they're being dispositioned by a system itself, like artificial intelligence. That's a key word, but it's not actually AI, but some sort of computer system that automatically triages it.
Yes. So, I mean, for the most part, the cases that I get, a lot of them also, still concludes as a no SAR. But the system that this financial institution uses, it's very sophisticated in that once you file or disposition a no SAR for a customer, it feeds that information so that the next time it happens, it recognizes it as a pattern, and then it just, it clears that alert. So
Wow, nice. That sounds pretty intuitive.
Yeah, that sounds pretty streamlined and effective, do you think that it is an effective model?
I think so. It's definitely very streamlined. The thing with what I do is it's not like when the cases that I get, it's not just like your typical, okay, it's I see that it's how do I explain this? usually there is a layer of complexity in the case, so you don't just get like a surface level, like in 2 seconds you see what's happening and it's reasonable and you can like clear it in like 5 minutes. There's usually some layer of something that the system felt, or I guess, I don't know, generally I guess systems don't feel anything, but there's just a level that like the system identified as it's not normal. Maybe it's something that needs to be looked at the end of the day. It can still be cleared, but usually like the very surface level ones, it gets cleared by the system right away.
Okay. And so if something's been escalated, it's likely, these system generated alerts are reoccurring across the industry. That's pretty much how it happens. But if it's been escalated once, then that does that mean it just automatically escalates it the following time, or uncertain, or how does that work? Or is it like, it's probably a risk score actually, most likely?
Yes. So without going into too much detail on how that goes on, yeah, basically, when the alert does get escalated into an actual, person, investigator to review the case, then, like chances are the case has a more complex layer to it that's like not easily identified by the system as, like reasonable. And so someone needs to have actual eyes on it and, be able to provide a reason on why it's reasonable, or, if it's not reasonable, then, proceed to escalate it to a SAR report. So.
Okay. One last thing before we move on. Curious then, since those are being triaged in a kind of automated fashion, how does that case disposition look? Is it lengthy, or is it kind of streamlined, skinny, or I don't know, 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, one paragraph?
What's nice about the system that we use is that, and you guys have kind of touched on this on the previous episode that I've seen. It almost provides like a template, and then if it's reasonable enough, you can follow that template to a T and just be like, okay, like this is reasonable and here's why, boom, boom, boom. But if it's more complex, then you kind of have to like move things around and just be able to fit the mold, to explain adequately what's happening in the situation. So yeah, it really depends. Sometimes I can finish a case in, I mean, not too fast, because there is some sort of research that you really have to do. You can't just, look at it at, face value and say, oh yeah, that looks reasonable. I don't even have to like look too much further into this. Like usually there's a lot of, there's a moderate research that goes on in every case. So yeah, it really depends on the case. Every
Cool.
case is different.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's interesting to know. I'm sure that's going to be more of a prevalent thing going forward with all the new technology and just data visualization in general, is that more automated approach to triage those alerts. But awesome. Thanks for sharing. Telling us a little bit more about what you do. We'll move on to question 2. This one is, what kind of trends are you, your team, or your institution noticing? It could be something that you guys talk about weekly, daily, or just something you've noticed personally, or yeah, it's something that that your institution focuses on.
Okay. Ever since I started working for this major retail bank, and this is just personally, I've personally started to notice a trend pertaining to excessive P2P activity, only because in my previous employment, we dealt mostly with businesses, so there wasn't a lot of P2P activity. But because I'm now working for a major retail bank, there's definitely a lot of excessive P2P activity that I'm noticing. And many of these cases involve what's called a rotating savings and credit associations, or I'll call it ROSCAs. That's like the acronym for it. So basically, these groups are self-formed by a group of people within a community or those who share the same cultural norms. And the purpose of the club is that each member makes monthly contributions to a pot, and every month one member of the group takes home the entire amount. So once one rotation is complete, everyone's received the same amount of money. So for those receiving the funds at the beginning of the rotation, it's like getting an interest-free loan. And then those getting the funds at the end essentially gets like an accumulated savings. So what I've observed with these cases is that a lot of ethnic groups conduct these transactions using P2P. In some cases, it's very apparent because the members use identifiable terms in their transaction notes. Like, so there's like a region in Africa where it's predominantly called susu activity or susu groups. I know in my home country, the Philippines, we have a term for this as well. It's called bahulugan. Anyway, so the way these groups are set up, they're essentially kind of operating as unlicensed MSBs. So when activity like this is spotted, they usually need to be reported, or at the very least, the activity needs to be monitored very closely because the pattern and the activity can look very similar to what we analysts perceive to be suspicious activity, like funneling, for example. So
Yeah, that's interesting. One of our previous participants also spoke on that. She referenced it as Suzu.
Oh.
So that's something that she brought up also. And I'm familiar with that too. In my previous experiences, it was through a financial technology platform where they did do this. So you mentioned P2P. It's a peer-to-peer is what that means for anybody
Yes,
listening?
peer-to-peer, yes.
Peer-to-peer. Now, these peer-to-peer transactions, is this like a product internal, or is this a third-party product that's being used?
It's an internal product, but also like, well, I guess let me backtrack. So we don't own the product per se, but we accommodate transfers using this platform, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Would you say, well, like you mentioned already a little bit on the red flags associated, because they kind of do tie into different types of typologies, right? Money laundering typologies, but it's not necessarily uh, money laundering, right? It's just something these cultures participate in.
Yes.
However, like you said, it's an unlicensed MSB. So
Mhm.
are these being reported regularly, or is this just something that you guys take note of and then monitor it more closely?
I believe so. I believe we do, depending on how excessive they use it, and if if it really is a susu activity, or if it's something that is disguised as susu activity but is actually, something that's, a illicit activity. It's usually monitored more closely. So you usually just try to at least escalate it, or have someone have eyes on it and just monitor it and make sure that it's not like getting too excessive, or if there's any just egregious activity that's happening within those accounts, then it needs to be reported. So, but it is monitored very closely.
Cool.
Very interesting.
I know, yeah.
It's been brought up already once before, so it's definitely prevalent, obviously.
Yeah.
There's a similar type institution size too, though, so maybe that's something. I guess you have greater exposure to seeing those types of activities than specific other institutions. But sweet. Any last remarks, Lauren?
No.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to question 3. Do you have any interesting investigations that you would like to talk about in more detail?
Yeah, I mean, I have something in mind, although, so we kind of me and a group of people, we actually found this case while I was collaborating with a group of people. But basically, we identified the activity and then we had to escalate it because the financial institution that I work with, they have a specialty team for this. And basically they have a specialty team for like, very complex cases like human trafficking, casinos, like they have like teams for each specialty. So basically, let me see. So this memorable investigation I've conducted here was, again, like what I said, possible human trafficking. So basically the customer's listed occupation on record was a taxi driver. But then when we look more into internal records, we saw that she was a beneficial owner of a massage parlor, so that was suspect. And so we started looking into started digging more and more into beneficial ownership and like her actual business. And long story short, the activity in her personal account appeared excessive, and she was using a variety of instrument types to move funds around. So we started looking into her business as well, even though like her business didn't really alert. So we did a cursory review on that. And just to give a bit of a context, I don't know if you guys remember Backpage.com when it was seized by the FBI in 2018.
Yeah.
So a lot of websites that used to be advertised on Backpage.com, they migrated to other websites like RubMaps and Adult Search, basically like, websites for looking for, sex workers, basically.
Oh, okay.
And we were able to connect this massage parlor to one of these illicit websites using a phone number search. So long story short, the case was escalated to a specialty team within the department that handles specifically human trafficking cases. And then because we initially work the case, we were able to like check on it periodically to see what the final determination would be. And then ultimately, the financial institution decided to close the relationship with the customer because there was really ample evidence to suggest that they were conducting illicit activity and laundering funds. So yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, that's interesting. Was that pretty soon after you began there? Like one of the first things you were exposed to?
Yes, it was one of the first things that we were exposed to, and it's a great example and a great case to be exposed to, because then it kind of like gives me an idea of what to look for like the next cases, similar cases that I've seen. So far I haven't seen anything that's quite similar to this, but yeah, that was definitely an interesting experience.
Yeah.
Was one of the biggest red flags just seeing like the occupation listed?
Yeah,
Like,
well,
as
that was one of the biggest things, because we were like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you're making this much money and you're saying you're a taxi driver. And then when we looked into the records, like, because the business didn't alert, like we weren't really aware that she owned the business until we really started digging into like, like beneficial ownership and like the actual documents within the bank records. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
I feel like, I mean, I've only worked like one case that I had activity that's appeared to be related possibly to human trafficking. And it was the same red flag was their nature of business, or their occupation was like bookkeeping consultant, yet their activity consisted of hotel purchases in small towns and random areas and cash withdrawals at ATMs. So it's interesting to hear you had to say something similar.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, and I already know this, but for the people listening, that this is something that you have previously been trained to identify, or
So with my previous employment, I haven't quite seen a situation like this. So when I moved into this new role, that's when I got more exposed to cases like this. So when we were collaborating on this case, that's when I learned a lot more, because there were people in my group who had years and years of experience, who like really knew what they were looking at. So like for me to see that and be able to see like their thought behind like, oh yeah, this is very suspect, this is, you know, unusual, and oh, and because, you know, let's look at their phone numbers to see if, you know, anything pops up, and like things that I wouldn't even think about initially, as far as like research using for my research methods. Now I'm like, okay, I should probably look into that. So it
Yeah.
definitely broadened my knowledge base.
Yeah, I think the phone number search and the email sometimes go overlooked a lot of the time, but
Mm-hmm.
you'll be surprised because a lot of the times that phone number is a part of some of those web page listings, right? On that used to be on Backpage, but the other ones that you mentioned now, that's kind of that'll be like the only hit you get for that phone number that's on file at your institution, and you Google it, and then you're like, why is it on, you know, this known bad website?
Yeah.
And more often than not, it does happen that way. I know previously in some of my experiences too, dealing with that, uh, it was interesting because depending on what type of institution you're at, the customer information available isn't always there, but
Mm-hmm.
more times than not, you at least have an email and or a phone number available to whatever type of account or product that's being used by these customers.
For sure.
All right, great, sweet. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's definitely interesting. Uh, that's one of the more prevalent ones that I feel like is touched on throughout the year all the time by organizations. They offer all these trainings. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. But all of the professional organizations, ACAMS, ACFE, ACFCS, those organizations offer a lot of training in that area. So I'm sure it was nice to finally come across something that you were able to apply some of that training to.
Definitely.
All righty. And then we'll move on to question 4 here. This one is, in regard to any of your experience, what is an issue or obstacle that has impacted you, your team, or institution the most in regard to your ability to complete your daily task responsibilities? This may be something that just slows you down, it's inefficient, or it's a complete roadblock.
I think one obstacle that is experienced across the board in our industry is the frequent changes in policies and procedures, which tends to disrupt the flow of reviewing and filing reports. So I don't think this is anyone's fault really, but it's just very much the nature of the beast. So basically, leaders in our industry are constantly updating policies to guide how we review and file our reports. And in turn, bad actors find ways to adapt to that and circumvent the processes in place to continue to launder funds without being detected, and then which in turn requires us to adapt. And so it's just a continuous cycle of constant change. And then when those changes happen, the analysts' workflow gets disrupted because now they either have to modify the way they conduct the reviews or add or change the way they write their narrative to accommodate those changes. And I mean, our line of work can be very quantity driven sometimes, depending on, you know, who you ask. And what I mean by that is we only have so much time to conduct the reviews and then decide whether to file or not, and then write the SAR or no SAR narrative. So like that takes time. So I'm sorry. I apologize about that.
No worries.
And it's just it's very time consuming. Like if we can spend a lot of as much time as we want to perfect like a report and like, you know, give all the information that is needed by law enforcement, it would be like very ideal. But because we are constricted to, you know, time constraints, then it's very hard when like you already have your flow, you know what you're going to do, and then all of a sudden, hey, by the way, like you need to add this, or you need to change this in your narrative, or you need to word it this way. Then it's like it just kind of, it really disrupts the flow, and then it hinders the analysts. So yeah, when changes come down to the pipeline, that requires us investigators to change our usual workflow. That's very disruptive and time consuming. But again, this is not really anyone's fault. It's just the nature of the beast, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking to that point. So do you think that those changes are relayed efficiently? Are you kept apprised of these changes frequently, or have you been kept apprised of these changes frequently, or is that another part of it kind of slowing you down too? Is that maybe the information doesn't trickle down as quickly as maybe it should be, because we do a lot of work in our day, and you may hear rumblings of a certain change, and maybe some people are doing it already, or some a different leader has told a different group of people to start doing that, and then you get all this, it's
Are you
confusing right to
speaking
that
from
point.
experience?
It gets confusing, right? And you're like, well, wait a minute, why are they doing it this way and I'm doing it that way? So do you think that, like, that also adds to the inefficiencies and kind of messes up your workflow?
Yes, definitely when leaders are not consistent in the message that they give out to the different, so like if the managers for each team are not consistent with the way they relay the messages to their respective teams, then the quality differs across the teams, and then that can be an issue. But I mean, for the most part, like the managers and the senior investigators have been very consistent with when they're, because we have weekly meetings, and then they usually do those to, if there's any changes, they usually tell us about that. And then they also tell us to always check the procedures when we're, writing a narrative and like something that we're not usually coming across, we come across, and, just make sure to check the procedures. And yeah, I mean, and then they also hold, I guess, how, no, I'd call it like a calibration meeting, where the senior investigators get told on, like, okay, if your investigators get this kind of case, like this is how they should disposition. That's one of the things too, actually, that now that I think about it, is very different from my previous experience with my previous employer. So, and I think it's a matter of who's overseeing the financial institution, quite honestly, because with my previous employer, it was the FRB, the Federal Reserve Board, and then the current financial institution that I work for is being overseen by OCC. And from what I've seen, the OCC is like a lot stricter with their SAR narrative requirements. And it's unlike with my previous experience, where as long as you really just adequately support your SAR or no SAR, then you're good. And like nobody will really tell you to change your disposition unless like you are like missing something major, or like you just completely, screw it up. With what I'm experiencing right now is there's a lot more nuances and details that they look at. And even though, at least I feel, in my personal opinion, I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like sometimes my dispositions would be, adequately researched and backed up. But then when senior investigators see what I've written, they'd ask me lots of questions. And then at the end of the day, if they don't agree with what I've said, even though it's, adequately backed up by evidence, they will tell me like, okay, you need to change your disposition to this, and, say it because of X, Y, and Z. So it's definitely an adjustment. But yeah, so that was one of the bigger things too, is I feel like I'm there's less leeway for errors, or less leeway for personal experiences, like using your personal experience to back your dispositions, basically.
That's interesting. I think yeah, that's probably pretty standard across the board, through a lot of these organizations. We talked about it previously, of like kind of like a template of some sort, but it's typically like based off typologies, and the institutions will give it to you, and it'll have all the standard verbiage and the required information that's being, requested by your federal regulator, the institution's oversight body. And then there'll be like just a little snippet in the middle somewhere of your body paragraph where it's like, this is where you can put your 2 cents in.
Yep. Basically.
Yep.
I have a question. So when you are getting the like updated policies and procedures and your meetings with your I guess your coworkers and the senior investigators, do you guys do that basically all throughout the day? Like, do you feel like there's a lot of collaboration of like you file or you submit your case or your no SAR or your SAR and the senior investigator gives you like instant feedback? Or like, so you are aware if you are missing some of these things that keep updating?
So yeah, the senior investigators here have been very good about, at least my experience. It could be different for like other teams. Maybe I just happen to have really good senior investigators in my team, but they're really good at giving feedback right away, like within, like when you submit a case, depending on if they're swamped with meetings. If they're not swamped with meetings for the day, then they're very good at like reading your narrative and then giving you feedback if there's like some tweaks that they want you to do on the narrative. Usually they will, even if it's just small things, like you don't need to change your disposition, it's just like you just add like a certain word that like kind of touches on like a certain typology, then they will like, ping you real quick, hey, if you can add this verbiage, blah, 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 so they're really good with providing instant feedback. And even really when they ask you to do revisions too, they're really good. But they do ask you to be very prompt in revising. So if they ask you to revise something, they want you to like work on that. Like that's like the number one priority. Like you can't be looking, like working on other cases, because they want to get that cleared as soon as possible. So
Awesome. That's
That's
good.
good to hear. That's nice.
yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like, so you're the SAR recommendator. Recommendator. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and then the senior investigator is the actual SAR determining
Mhm.
body, and then managers actually
In the
approve the
background.
SARs.
Huh?
Managers approve the SARs then?
No, so it's the senior managers that approve it, or senior investigators, apologize. It's the senior investigators that approve it. But the managers, they're really just in the background. To be honest, we don't, at least like the investigators, not the senior investigators, regularly communicate with the managers, but like the actual investigators, we don't really talk to the manager that much. We really only hear from that person like once a week when we have the meetings, when they have something to put out, that's like organization wide, and like just more admin stuff, is at least from what I've seen. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we touched on your structure a little bit, but now that we kind of hear how your business actually functions, your daily responsibilities, it's interesting to see the different structure.
mhm.
All right, awesome. Any last remarks, Lauren?
No.
Nope. All right, cool. Well, you can go ahead and lead us to question 5, Lauren.
Okay, so Gianna, can you describe how you got into the financial crimes compliance career field and what tips that you would recommend for those looking to get into the industry?
So I think I got here mostly, or a lot of it is because of luck. I guess I was just lucky when it comes to like choosing like the things that I've been doing since I started kind of in this field, if that makes sense. So just, I guess for context, my college degree, my bachelor's degree was in global security and intelligence studies. So when I was, when I was in college, like my knowledge base for things that are related to this industry. Like I took classes in personality and profiling, history of terrorism, intelligence writing. It gave me a very solid knowledge base on like, you know, what goes on in this industry and what we're looking for as far as terrorist financing, money laundering. And then when I graduated and backtrack a little bit. So I was from the Philippines, and when I came here to the US, I enlisted in the reserve so I could get an expedited citizenship. And then when I got my citizenship, I applied for an Army ROTC scholarship. I got the scholarship. Fast forward 4 years after college, I commissioned into the US Army. And my experience with the Army that helped me with this industry is honing my writing abilities. Funnily enough, because, you know, Army is not really known for for writing. But anyway, I did quite a few 15-6s. So like for those who aren't familiar with it, it's investigations that are opened by the unit commanders, and then they assign investigation officers to, you know, look more into the incident, and based on what they've seen, the information they've gathered, then they form their, you know, like their objective opinion on what's happened, and then like their recommendations for follow-up or follow-on steps for that incident. So that kind of honed my, you know, ability to investigate, talk to different people, get information, and then based on all the information gathered, then, you know, you come up with your objective opinion on what's happened, and then give recommendation on how to resolve that incident. So it plays into the writing the narrative and kind of like figuring out like where to pull information, how to use that information to make a cohesive like narrative of explaining what's happened. And then when I got out of the military, I decided I wanted to pursue a master's. So I did my MBA, and from my MBA, I found out that I actually like numbers and getting information from numbers, and, you know, Excel spreadsheets and whatnot, and pivot tables. And so was able to hone that part of, you know, my knowledge base. And then when I was done with my master's, then I started to network, and I met fellow veteran, retired first sergeant Ramon. If you're watching this, hi. And we were able to, you know, sit down and talk, and he introduced me to this career field, which I had no idea even existed. And the more and more he talked to me about it, the more and more I got excited, because I'm like, this is the job for me, because I feel like I'm hitting all the marks. And then when a position opened up in his company, he was able to like refer me and put trust in me that, you know, I will do a great job you know, with the position. And so yeah, here we are. I'm loving what I'm doing, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. I want to say 50% of the time, I don't consider it work. It's actually like just very mind stimulating, unless you're like really getting rabbit holed into like some cases, then it's a little exhausting. But for the most part, it's very stimulating. And as far as trying to get into the career field, to be 100% transparent, I think a lot of it has to do with networking and people, you know, and being able to project like that trustworthiness so that people will vouch for you and be like, okay, I think this person will be a good fit for this role, and, you know, let's give that person a try. At least that's like from my experience, because without that exposure and like that networking opportunity, I don't think I would have ever gotten into this industry. I stumbled into this, and I'm really happy I did. And then as far as tips for getting into the industry, again, networking, number one, but it also helps to have certifications like, you know, ACFE, ACAMS is a big plus. It's a big brownie points. If you know, like a recruiter sees that you have an ACAMS certification, they think that, you know, you're very, if you're not exposed to the industry already, they know that you're very interested in getting into the industry. Or if you're already in the industry, they know that you are very knowledgeable with and have the necessary skill sets that they need. So yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
You had
back
a
to
bit of
back.
all of it, networking, certifications, education.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
you're the gold standard, all right. But well, no, back to back episodes now. We got all military crew here again. Last episode we had all military. We're getting a lot of Army on here, so I don't know, Lauren, you're getting outnumbered.
I know. I need to find someone with Air Force background.
Yep, yep. Tell them come on here. But that it's interesting, and you kind of touched on it with like the ACAM specifically, the CAMS certification given by the ACAMS organization. But yeah, I feel like it's viewed differently though, like depending on I guess the hiring managers or the recruiters, because like you said, sometimes they're like, oh, this proves that they're interested in this. Other times, yeah, it's like, oh, they're a professional in this industry and they have a good understanding, right? This is their certification that's letting your employer know that you're qualified to do this. I guess it's called the gold standard of anti-money laundering, isn't that their pitch, their selling pitch, by the ACAMs? It's the gold standard.
I think
But
so.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting how it's viewed, like its perspective is taken. Sometimes the people just discredit it completely. Honestly, within the industry, you have
Mm.
you have folks that are like, no certification's gonna teach you real world experience or just learning on the job, and they're not wrong. But I think it goes to show that individuals desire, drive, not only knowledge base but capacity to learn.
Mhm.
I feel like that's the way that the certification should be viewed. Um, but you can meet a lot of people that have tons of certifications, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best investigator. I mean, I have a mouthful next to my name, but um, it's okay, right? Uh,
Yeah.
we joked about it on the last one too, actually, as far as like how to get in the industry, certifications, and then and then I said, well, it hasn't really opened up many doors for me, but in the future, maybe, hopefully, it'll open up more doors.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree in that aspect. I mean, it is at the end of the day, a certificate is a piece of paper, and like people can get that. I don't want to say easily, but it's definitely doable. And then once you get in the industry, you will get to see what people are actually capable of. So, but yeah, I think the certificate is just like one of the gauges that recruiters use to kind of like determine if they like a special I don't want to say special consideration, but like an additional consideration that they use to determine if you're a good fit for the role that they're looking for. So
Yeah, helps with the negotiation too of salary or expected pay, right?
for sure, yes,
I think
yes.
Ramona said it himself. So hopefully he does watch this episode. But he says, if you're looking at a job description and they give you this pay band that's 70,000 to 150, and you're like, well, of course I want 150,000. But then you look at the job requirements, and okay, I got those, and then you go to the preferred, the preferred qualifications below that, and it's like
Mhm.
CAMS, CFE,
Yes.
and like so. Ramona said, and it's kind of always stuck with me, is that each one of those that you don't have, that's a notch off that max, expected pay band. You're like, well, you
Mhm.
can't get 150 because you don't have that. And
Yeah,
then two or three things later, you're like, oh wow, I guess I meet the standard qualifications. I don't meet any of the preferred qualifications. So that probably puts me ideally somewhere in the middle of that pay band, but maybe even below it. So it's good that way for that negotiation perspective.
for sure. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, yeah, that's the questions we have for you. Appreciate you for jumping on here, and giving us some of your time. I think it's awesome, and it's nice to reconnect with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun talking about these things. So
Yeah, and
Yeah,
thank you
right.
for your tips some of the stuff that you had to say I'm going to use in my current work, which I'm excited for. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully I think there's a lot of good information we covered in this episode. And the policies, procedures. I think that's going to be a reoccurring theme too. That's one that I think also impacts us a lot. I feel like I personally kind of use those as recommendations sometimes, and try to improve those methods, or past policies, and I try to improve on them. But unless it's written into a new policy, it's usually turned down. But but that's the point, right? Try to keep those policies up to date. So it sounds like in your experience, you've actually are being given that opportunity. But I feel like that even, I guess I'm kind of surprised, even though it is being kept up to date, it still does kind of hinder your ability to, do your whole workflow. So I guess there's probably no good response there, because the outdated policies, procedures also hinder your workflow, because maybe it doesn't exactly streamline your
Because you have to take the time to read it and like get reacclimated to the changes, so
Yeah.
that takes time. And yeah, so
Yep. All right, cool. Well, would like people listening or watching, come and connect with us on LinkedIn. We each got LinkedIns. I still got to tune up Lauren's. That's my payment to Lauren for her helping me out here. Is tuning up her LinkedIn. But go search
I
us on
love that.
LinkedIn. Yeah,
That's great.
connect with us. Send a message. And also, if you are a financial crimes compliance professional and would like to be spotlighted on FinCrime Insiders, please reach out to us at our email listed in the description. Otherwise, it's fincrimeinsiders@gmail.com. We'd love for you to come on the show, share your knowledge, your expertise, and be spotlighted on here. But that's it for episode 3 of FinCrime Insiders. Thank you very much for watching and listening.